So just how good is the Line 6 Helix? Well, for people who watch my channel, they'll know that I think it's actually an amazing amp modeler. It's my favorite amp modeler. It's what I use for all of my recording sessions, anytime I play live. And when I say Line 6 Helix, I could mean the HX Stomp, I could mean Helix Native, I could even mean Pod Go. So I will include all of those in with the Line 6 Helix, but I wanted to start this little series, and I think this is going to be a lot of fun, and that's really all this is for, is fun, is to compare the Helix tones and amp models to other very famous, popular, and sometimes considered the best amp models from other companies, whether it be software or hardware. I'm not going to be able to get my hands on every piece of equipment out there, but the ones I do have that I can match up with an existing model in the Helix, I will do so. And we'll just take a fun look and do some comparisons on how these sound. And I'll take a couple different approaches to it. So today I'm looking at the PLACATER Dirty model, which is the Helix model of the Friedman BE100 amp. Very famous amp, very highly regarded, well-regarded amp. And I'm going to compare it to the Brainworx software version. As far as I understand, it would be the officially, I guess, licensed version of the actual Friedman model. They actually use the Friedman name, which, you know, for copyright reasons, they aren't allowed to do unless it is sanctioned by the owner of the copyright, in this case, Friedman. So I think it would widely be considered one of the best Friedman amp models out there. And Brainworx, this is going to be the same plugin that's on the Universal Audio Apollo platform that runs off of their hardware, but I have a native version of it. So what I've done here is I've plugged into my IK Multimedia Axe.io, just have it set on the normal settings for the guitar input, and it's going to feed both the Brainworx Friedman BE100 plugin and Helix Native set with the PLACATER Dirty. So let's go over to Cubase and take a look and see what we have. So you'll see my setup here. First of all, here is the Friedman. Really, I'll just expand it a bit here. Really nice interface. Let's take a look at it. Very beautiful looking picture of the actual BE100, all the same settings. This is supposed to be a very accurate representation of exactly what this amplifier is. A couple cool features. You can go to an FX rack here, and you have a noise gate, which I have turned off. You can have sort of low and high cuts, they call tight and smooth. You can change those from post to pre. I have those set at the sort of lowest and highest settings so they're not affecting the sound right now. You can even turn on a delay, which is really cool. Mix that in, different feedback. You can have kind of a lo-fi tape type of setting on it. You have a whole slew of included IRs, which are going to be basically entire recording chains of different cabs through different microphones and different microphone preamps, and you can get the info to those right here. You see I have a Mesa Boogie rectifier, 412 cabinet loaded with vintage 30s, mic'd with a Royer R121 through a Neve VXS preamp, and EQ'd with a Massenburg 8200 EQ, so very nice recording chain. You can also turn off the impulse response if you want to feed it through a different impulse response that you like better, maybe in your DAW. You've also got an input gain, which I'm going to leave at 0. You can bypass the preamp, bypass the power amp, and you have a power soak here that just sort of is going to act as your overall output level. So very interesting stuff. We'll come back and take a look at that in a second. So really neat. We have our fat C45 saturation. Now, if I shrink that back down, we can compare that over to our Helix version. So what I did here is, the hard thing when dealing with impulse responses is that if you're going to compare apples to apples, it's almost best to use the same impulse response on each amp model, which I'm going to do later in this video. But I want to try something first. I want to compare it using the stock cab in the Helix, because so many folks talk kind of down about the stock cabs in the Helix, and I'm a big proponent of how great they can sound, right? So when you load up the PLACATER Dirty amp model, you end up having it paired automatically with the 412 Cali V30, which is a Mesa Boogie 412 cabinet loaded with vintage 30s, and that's what I have, as we remember, in my actual Brainworx Friedman BE100, mic'd with an R121 ribbon mic, same thing I did here. Now, you'll notice one thing I did is I pulled the distance back to 10.5 inches. I just found that kind of matched the sound of what we have here. Here's what we don't know. We don't know where the folks at Brainworx placed their microphone in relation to the cabinet. Was it close mic'd? Was it pulled back? Was it off axis, on axis? We don't really know. It also ran it through an equalizer. So to say that these are going to match, just because we're using the same microphone model and same type of cabinet, we don't really know if it's the same cabinet, you know. So there's a lot of ifs here, but I just wanted to see and compare what these would sound like in this particular situation. I turned the low cuts and the high cuts off all together on it. So I pulled it back 10.5 inches, the 121 ribbon, because it seemed to get me sort of in the ballpark of what I was hearing coming out of the Brainworx version of it. And then on the amp settings, we see we have drive, which is going to be our gain control here. We have bass, we have mid, treble, presence. We have a channel volume, which doesn't affect the tone on the Helix version. It's just going to be whether the amp is louder or quieter. And we have the master. Obviously on the Helix we have these deeper functions, the seg, ripple, bias, bias X. I'm not going to touch those. We have the HBE, which is right over here. We have the fat setting, which is here. We have the C45 and the saturation function as well. So when I pull up the Brainworx model, I get a different IR, but like I said, I already told you I loaded this one in, but we come up with basically presence, bass, middle, treble, straight up the middle at 5. The master at about what I would say is it looks like about 3.8 and the gain at 5. So I thought, let's take a listen to that and sort of see how that sounds. Now you'll notice here I have a channel called Friedman and I have a channel called PLACATER. So this is the Brainworx Friedman, and this is what this sounds like. And this is bone dry. Keep in mind, I'm not really trying to dial anything in here. I'm just playing the amp sounds, right? I didn't want to have it swimming in reverb or anything, but this is going to be pretty bone dry. So that's the tone that we get out of it just as it comes up without playing around with it at all. So how does that then compare to our Helix version? Well, if we solo our Helix version, this is the sound we get out of it. We'll go back. So there's obviously a difference, as would be expected, right? But how much of that is coming from the IR and how much of that is coming from the actual amp model? But I just wanted to show you that I think both are quite respectable sounding. Very good, in fact. There's your Helix, back to your Brainworx. Little more bite on the Brainworx one, but I'm sure if we dialed a little bit of presence and treble in, probably a little too much. Now I've tried to match these in volume as close as I can get them. So we can see just by moving that microphone around, it's going to change things up quite a bit as well. What happens if we come in and say crank the gain up all the way to 10 on this? We'll go over to Helix and do the same thing. Again, we see that the different IR is probably causing us a huge part of the difference we're hearing. So I just thought it'd be fun to do that and show the stock cabs on the Helix actually sound really, really good. And I'd be happy with that. Although this wouldn't be my first choice of stock cabs, I actually really enjoy the Placater with the Greenback 25. With the 160 ribbon, I believe I usually throw on there. I'll just take the low and high cuts off. Obviously, that's going to be very different than the Brainworx now. And much louder. Okay, so here's one other thing that I did do though. And let's bring those settings back to where we had them. I actually recorded a really dry little guitar sound here. And if I just bypass the Friedman, this is what that sounds like. So a little guitar riff, just guitar straight in, so that I could copy paste it and process both at the same volume and toggle back and forth. And I think this is where you'll start to hear that the differences aren't as dramatic when we do it as such. So here's what we'll do. We'll keep these settings up here. Get the Friedman back up there. I can toggle just by soloing the Placater. That's going to be the Friedman Brainworx model. So we're going to start with the Friedman model. Not bad, and actually surprisingly close. Let's do this now. Let's actually shorten up the loop so that we can loop the very tiny section and go back and forth to each one. I'm surprised how close they sound considering that IR is not the same, nothing even similar about it. Pretty amazing stuff. Okay, so one other thing that I did here, I pulled up a version of Speaker Mix Pro, which was the plugin from Celestion that I did a video about using their DSRs. And I pulled up two instances of this, pulled up a vintage 30 speaker going through a 412 closed back cabinet mic'd with a Royer R121, similar to what we had going on with our two examples here. And I copied and pasted the settings exactly the same. You'll see this one's on the Friedman and it's set to the thinner sound since the ribbon mics are a little bit fatter sounding. And then I pulled up the same thing, same settings exactly on the Placater, the Helix Placater. Now, what I'd have to do here then is I would have to disable the impulse response on both. So I'll turn off the stock cab and I disable the impulse response. And then I will simply turn on Speaker Mix Pro, and now what we should hear is these going through the exact same IR. In this case, a DSR, a dynamic speaker response from the fine folks at Celestion. If you're interested, take a look at that great piece of software. So we can now play the same riff and toggle back and forth at these exact same settings yet again, but this time with the identical impulse response. First up, we'll have the Brainworx Friedman. And what we'll do, we can hear that the Brainworx Friedman's a little heavier in the bottom end, but let's just do that smaller loop again on this and see what happens. Pretty amazing. When I pulled a little bit of the bass out on the Brainworx model, turned the volume down slightly on the Helix, we got something that sounds like eerily similar, which is incredible, seeing that these are from completely different modeling engines. Pretty incredible stuff. So I'm really liking both of these amp models, and they both sound amazing and feel amazing under the fingers. Now, one other thing is, if I was to come in here and throw in, let's say, a transistor tape, set it a quarter note, give it a little bit of delay here on the Helix version. Just that little bit of delay helps to bring it to life a little bit. But we can come in and turn on the delay, go quarter note, let's say, and set the mix the same, 29-ish%. Feedback at 30%. Lo-fi, let's turn that up a bit. Go back over to the Brainworx. A little too much on the lo-fi. Really, really heavy on the lo-fi there. Very, very nice stuff. What do you guys think? I don't know how meaningful any of that was, other than to just sort of see how an amazing a job the folks at Line 6 have done modeling, I think, most of their amps, but especially this one. I mean, this is going up against sort of the sanctioned version from the folks at Brainworx, which is used under the Universal Audio platform, using the actual Friedman name. And a lot of folks have really raved about this plugin, as they rightfully should. It's amazing. But Helix, even with its own stock cab, I find is every bit as good. Are they going to be slightly different? Well, yes, and that was to be expected, especially when using different impulse responses. But amazing once we throw in Speaker Mix Pro or a third-party IR where we, or just play them both through the same IR, we get a shockingly similar results. Maybe we need slightly different settings to get there, but both are going to be quite amazing. So I hope that was a fun look at it, guys. Sorry for all my noodling and having to hear the same riff over and over again. I know that can get annoying sometimes, but I wanted to do that so we could really hear the same performance and not be tricked by our ears, and maybe I'm hitting harder on one and softer on the other, which that performance always kind of will throw a wrench into things if we hear it through different performances. So I hope you guys enjoyed that. I'm going to do more like this. I'll keep it kind of quiet as to which models I'm going to choose and what I'm going to put them up against. But I think this is kind of a fun new little series. Let me know if you guys want to see more like this and if you enjoyed this. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Please like the video, share it with anybody who you think would enjoy watching it as well, and hit the subscribe button. Hit the little bell notification too to get notified when I put new content out. And I'll be back really soon. It's my last video for 2020. On to the new year. Thank you again for tuning in, and ciao for now.